15 years ago, the small town of Waverly Hills was lit up by lanterns' white roses and the glow of a perfect October sunset. The townspeople gathered at the historic Belmont Chapel for what was supposed to be the happiest day in Elena Carter's life. Elena, the town's beloved elementary school teacher, was marrying Liam Rhodes, a charming entrepreneur who had swept her off her feet in less than a year of courtship. It was a wedding the town would never forget, but for all the wrong reasons. The ceremony began with grace. Elena, in her flowing satin dress, and Liam, in his crisp black suit, exchanged vows under a rose-draped arch as the old church bell rang out solemnly overhead. They held hands, smiled, and said the words that made them husband and wife. Within hours, that day turned to silence, panic, and suspicion. As guests raised their glasses during the reception toast, the newlyweds disappeared briefly to take private photos near the chapel gardens. A soft breeze rattled the autumn leaves. A slow song played faintly inside. No one saw them leave. Only Liam returned, pacing the hall, his face pale and his tie undone. He claimed Elena needed a moment alone and would be right back, but minutes passed, then an hour. The night spiraled into chaos. Maya Carter. Elena's younger sister was the first to panic. She had been holding the bridal bouquet, now forgotten and wilting, beside her chair. She rushed through the chapel, the parking lot, and the woods behind the bell tower, shouting her sister's name over and over. The only sound that answered was the distant creaking of the old bell, swaying gently in the breeze. The police were called by midnight. Search teams combed the area until dawn. Dogs picked up a scent that led to the church's side garden, but it ended at the stone wall separating the property from the woods. There was no blood, no torn fabric, no signs of a struggle. Nothing except Elena's veil snagged on a branch. When detectives reviewed the church's security camera system, they found something baffling. The recordings from that day were erased, completely wiped clean except for a single frame. It was a still image buried deep in the system. Elena stood alone in the hallway near the chapel office, clutching the sides of her dress, her eyes wide with fear. She was staring at something off-frame. That image would become the last known trace of her. It appeared in news reports, posters, and online forums for years to come, fueling speculation, obsession, and grief. Liam never gave a public statement beyond one brief press conference. He stood in front of the cameras and asked the public to come forward with information about his wife. After that, he disappeared from the spotlight. His business gradually folded under scrutiny. He sold the house they had bought together and left Waverly Hills within a year. The Carter family never stopped searching. Maya took it the hardest. She refused to believe her sister had simply run away or vanished without a trace. She stayed in town for several years, joining online communities, contacting cold case experts, and rewatching the hallway image until it burned itself into her memory. But time wore down even her resolve. Donations ran out. The media moved on. The case went cold. Belmont Chapel shut its doors a year later after a string of vandalism and whispered rumors of hauntings. The once vibrant church was overtaken by weeds. Its windows were boarded up. The bell tower remained untouched, its rusted chain swinging through the seasons. Then, on the 15th anniversary of Elena's disappearance, something happened that shattered the quiet. A demolition crew sent to inspect the chapel found a chilling sight. Hanging in the bell tower, clearly visible from the courtyard, was a wedding dress. It was not torn or aged, but perfectly preserved. The satin shimmered. The lace cuffs were white and clean. The initials EC were embroidered near the hip. It was Elena's dress. News spread instantly. The police were called. Reporters swarmed the scene. A forensics team confirmed the dress had only recently been placed there, no more than a few days old. Yet, the building had been sealed with chains and padlocks for years. Maya, now living across the state, returned the same night. She had not been back to Waverly Hills in almost a decade. As she stood outside the bell tower, memories rushed over her like a flood. Her chest tightened. Her hands shook. She was escorted into the chapel by an officer. The interior smelled of wood rot and mildew. The walls were coated in dust. But above her, suspended from a wooden beam in the bell tower, the dress swayed slightly. The officer handed her a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a slip of fabric carefully sewn into the left sleeve of the dress. It was a folded note. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Elena's. The note said 6 words. "Don't believe Liam. He is not who he says he is." Maya dropped the bag. Her breath caught in her throat. Tears filled her eyes. After 15 years of silence, this was the first sign her sister had left behind. Not a scream, not a trace of blood. A whisper. A warning. Detectives reopened the case that same night. Reporters called it a miracle. Commentators speculated about ghosts, confessions, and staged returns. But for Maya, the message was clear. Her sister had been afraid. Her sister had not simply vanished. And someone had returned the dress to be found. She looked at the bell tower one more time and whispered a promise to the darkness above. "I will find the truth." Maya sat alone in the motel room across from the Waverly Hills police station. The wedding dress image still burned into her mind. The dress was not just a garment from the past, it was a message. Elena had reached across time to leave a warning, 6 words that shattered everything Maya had accepted for 15 years. The name in the message was the name that haunted her more than any other. Liam. The man who had once knelt in front of their entire family, promising to love and protect her sister. The man who vanished from town without a trace. The man who Maya now realized had never been investigated thoroughly enough. Detective Lauren Briggs allowed Maya into the evidence room the next morning. The note was now preserved in a sealed envelope along with the dress fibers and high-resolution photographs. Maya read the message again. The handwriting was familiar, delicate, and unmistakable. It matched birthday cards and childhood notes. Maya asked the detective if the original case had ever reviewed Liam's finances. Briggs pulled up the archived report. Maya stared at the digital file. It was thinner than she expected. The only real documentation was a brief interview summary. Liam had said he loved Elena and was devastated. He offered to help the search. Nothing in the file suggested the police had probed deeper. Maya clenched her jaw. There was no mention of his finances, his behavior before the wedding, or his activities in the weeks after the disappearance. Maya requested a copy and drove to the county records office. There, with the help of a clerk, she pulled up a string of documents Liam had filed in the days leading to the wedding. The most shocking was an insurance policy. It had been created exactly 48 hours before the ceremony. The value was $2 million. The policy listed Elena as the insured party and Liam as the sole beneficiary. Maya felt sick. The policy was approved under an expedited clause. It had gone unnoticed during the initial investigation. Liam had never told anyone. Maya drove straight back to the station. Detective Briggs reviewed the document and confirmed it had never been part of the original file. That afternoon, the police submitted a request to the insurance company. Within a few hours, confirmation arrived. Liam had filed a claim 6 months after Elena's disappearance. He stated that his wife was presumed dead and requested payout under the missing person clause. The request had been denied due to insufficient evidence. Still, the attempt itself told Maya everything she needed to know. Maya left the station and visited the old florist shop near Main Street. It had changed owners, but the original florist, Dana Hart, now worked in a flower stall at the farmer's market. Maya introduced herself, and Dana remembered her instantly. Dana said she had never been comfortable with Liam. He had been too particular. Donna recalled one specific moment that stood out. Liam insisted on red tulips in Elena's bouquet. Donna thought it was odd. A week before the wedding, Dana had spoken with Elena, who clearly told her she hated tulips, especially red ones. Dana said she called Elena again to confirm, and Elena had sounded confused, insisting she never requested that change. Dana followed Elena's wishes and removed them. Maya thanked her and walked through the market in a daze. It was a small detail, but it felt important. Liam had tried to alter something personal, something symbolic. Next, Maya tracked down Franklin Boone, the caterer who had worked the reception. Franklin now managed a small diner on the edge of town. He recognized Maya and offered her coffee in the back booth. When she asked about the wedding, Franklin leaned back and frowned. He said Liam had asked for a private bottle of champagne to be kept cold and delivered to the bride and groom right after the toast. Franklin had complied, but later realized he never saw Elena drink it. Franklin remembered Liam pacing near the staff door checking his watch, looking agitated. After Elena disappeared, Franklin had thought about it many times, wondering if something had been wrong with the drink. The police had never asked. Maya asked if he remembered what happened to the bottle. Franklin said it disappeared. He assumed it had been taken away during the chaos. Maya returned to the chapel that evening. She stood near the garden wall where the search dogs had once lost the trail. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the stone. She noticed something strange near the base of a dying tree. A patch of earth had been disturbed. It looked recent. She photographed it and sent it to Detective Briggs. The next day, a forensic team scanned the area with ground-penetrating radar. They found a shallow depression. It was empty, but the dimensions matched the size of a human body. Soil samples indicated something had been buried there, possibly fabric or organic matter. Detective Briggs obtained a search warrant for Liam's last known residence. That required finding him. Maya hired a private investigator named Gerald Langley, who specialized in missing persons and digital trails. Within 2 days, Gerald found a lead. Liam had changed his name to Daniel Rhodes. He was living in a coastal town under a new identity. He ran a small investment firm. He kept a low profile. Maya stared at the photos Gerald provided. Liam looked older, but unchanged. Same glasses, same smug smile. Gerald also pulled images from social media accounts of people connected to Liam. In one photo, a woman appeared in the background. She had blonde hair and wore a familiar necklace. Maya froze. It was a sapphire pendant, delicate and round. She had given it to Elena on her 25th birthday. The woman's face was turned away, but Maya felt certain it was the same necklace. The image of the wedding dress hanging in the bell tower refused to leave Maya's mind. She had stared at it for hours, both in person and in the photographs taken by police. Every fold of fabric seemed to speak. Every thread seemed to point toward something unfinished. The bell tower had remained untouched for 15 years. The church had been sealed with padlocks. No one was supposed to go in. And yet someone had entered. Someone had climbed the stairs and left the dress in plain view. Detective Briggs approved a full forensic sweep of the bell tower itself. The wooden steps groaned under the weight of the investigators as they ascended. Dust and cobwebs clung to every surface. No fresh footprints were visible at first, but a blacklight scan revealed recent scuff marks on the top landing. Someone had been there. On the windowsill overlooking the cemetery, a fingerprint was recovered. It was smudged, but distinct enough to be analyzed. Maya stood at the base of the tower and waited as the evidence team searched every inch. They found nothing else until one officer pulled back a warped wooden panel near the bell's rusted pulley. Behind it, tucked between 2 beams, was a narrow cloth pouch. Inside the pouch was a single silver key and a strip of paper folded in half. The handwriting matched the note in the wedding dress. The paper read one sentence. "Look in the office drawer beneath the ledger." Maya recognized the reference immediately. The church office had remained locked since the building was closed. Briggs returned with the key. They unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room smelled of mold and forgotten memories. Dust floated in the air like fine ash. The ledger still sat on the desk, heavy with entries from events long past. Beneath it was a drawer swollen with age. It took effort to slide it open. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with ribbon and a single photograph. The letters were dated between January and September of the year Elena disappeared. They were written by Elena herself, addressed to someone whose name was never mentioned. The letters were never mailed. Each one described feelings of fear, confusion, and suspicion. She wrote about changes in Liam's behavior. She described how he followed her to work, how he listened at her door at night, how he seemed obsessed with controlling every detail of her life. In one letter, Elena wrote about finding a locked box in Liam's office. She believed it contained documents he never wanted her to see. She had tried to open it but failed. She ended the letter with a line that chilled Maya's blood. "If something happens to me, he is responsible." The photograph beneath the letters was old and faded, but clearly taken inside a car. Elena sat in the passenger seat. Her eyes were red. Her dress was slightly torn. The timestamp in the corner was dated the day of the wedding. Maya could not explain how the photo existed. It had never surfaced in the investigation. She turned it over. On the back were the words, "I escaped once, but I do not think I will again." The photo and the letters were entered into evidence. The fingerprint lifted from the windowsill returned with a partial match. It belonged to a woman named Cassidy Evans. Maya stared at the name in disbelief. Cassidy had been Elena's best friend. She had been the maid of honor. She had comforted the family after the disappearance. She had disappeared herself several years later. A new address was found through DMV records. Cassidy now lived alone in a small town outside the coast. Detective Briggs contacted the local sheriff and requested a welfare check. Maya insisted on coming along. When they arrived at the modest brick house, Cassidy answered the door slowly. Her hair was thinner. Her skin was pale. She looked like someone who had been carrying a secret too long. Briggs introduced herself and explained the situation. Cassidy invited them in. The living room was sparse, a small couch, a bookshelf filled with old paperbacks. A photograph of Cassidy and Elena sat on the coffee table. Cassidy stared at it as she spoke. She said she had kept the photo because it was the last time they had been truly happy. Maya asked about the wedding. Cassidy closed her eyes and nodded. She said she had seen something that night, something she never told anyone. She said Elena had come to her before the ceremony and whispered that she wanted to leave. She said she was afraid of Liam. She did not give reasons. She only said she could not go through with it. Cassidy told Elena to wait and promised to find her a ride, but by the time she returned, Elena was gone. Later that night, Cassidy thought she saw someone running through the trees beyond the parking lot. A woman in a white dress. Cassidy never told the police. She said Liam had called her the next day. He told her to forget what she saw. He said Elena had run away and that talking would only hurt the family more. He sounded calm. Too calm. Maya then asked about the necklace. Cassidy's hands shook. She admitted she had lived with Liam for several years. They were married under new names. He told her Elena had died. He said she had fallen from the cliffs outside town. Cassidy said she believed him at first. Then, one night she found a locked drawer in his study. Inside was the necklace. Elena's necklace. The one Maya had given her. Cassidy confronted him. He did not deny it. He only said it was over and that she should be grateful she was not next. She left him the next day and never looked back. Until now. The moment Cassidy closed the door behind them, Maya felt her knees weaken. The confession echoed in her ears. Her sister had tried to run, she had asked for help, and the person she trusted most had been silenced by fear. Maya knew now that the past had not ended with Elena's disappearance. It had only gone into hiding, buried under guilt lies and unfinished secrets. She climbed into the passenger seat of Detective Briggs's car and stared at the landscape as they drove back toward Waverly Hills. The sky was overcast. A storm brewed behind the hills. The chapel spire in the distance pierced the clouds like a blade. Maya's mind spiraled through every detail. The photo in the car, the letters in the drawer, the necklace hidden in a locked box. She could no longer pretend this was just a missing persons case. It was a carefully constructed wall, and now every brick had started to fall. At the station, Briggs printed a fresh caseboard and began reassembling the timeline. Maya offered to stay and help. She laid out the letters and highlighted key phrases. One line repeated more than once. he listens when I sleep." Maya remembered nights when Elena had stayed with her long before the engagement. Elena would sit on the edge of the bed, nervously checking the hallway. She never explained. Now, Maya wondered how long Liam had been watching her. Briggs examined the wedding guest list again and found something odd. One entry stood out. A name with no last name, just the initial J. It was written in pencil, not ink. The RSVP box had been checked manually, unlike the others. Briggs called the catering company and requested backup sheets. Franklin, the caterer, emailed a scanned copy of the original seating chart. The same name appeared near the front, seated at a table with distant relatives. Briggs traced the number listed on the form. It was disconnected. Maya decided to visit the address instead. It led to a small rental apartment on the edge of town. The landlord said the unit had been empty for over a decade, but remembered a man named Jonas living there briefly. He was quiet, paid in cash, and left suddenly. He had worked odd jobs and often slept in the woods. The landlord believed he had mental health struggles. Maya searched local shelters and found one with a handwritten entry from 13 years ago. Jonas B. intake notes listed him as disoriented, possibly paranoid. He had mentioned seeing something at a wedding. The shelter closed years ago, but the files had been donated to a historical archive. Maya called in a favor from an old librarian friend and gained access. Inside the dusty archive room, she opened a thin manila folder labeled Jonas B. One page caught her attention. It was a caseworker note. Jonas had told staff that he saw a woman being forced into a black van outside Belmont Chapel the night of a wedding. He said she was barefoot and crying. Maya's chest tightened. The shelter staff dismissed it as a delusion. No report was filed. Maya took the copy to Briggs, who immediately issued a request through state records. Within hours, they located Jonas at a long-term care facility 3 counties away. Maya and Briggs visited him the next morning. The facility was quiet. Jonas sat in the courtyard feeding birds. His beard was thick and white, his eyes distant but kind. When Briggs explained why they were there, Jonas looked away. He said he remembered the woman in the white dress. He said she came running out of the trees, her hair falling loose, her feet bleeding. He remembered her face clearly. He said she looked at him and mouthed something he could not hear. Jonas said 2 men in suits emerged from behind the chapel and grabbed her. One man wore glasses. The other had a scar across his neck. They forced her into a black van. He said he tried to call out but felt paralyzed. One of the men looked at him and raised a finger to his lips. Jonas said he walked away and never told anyone because he knew no one would believe him. Maya asked him if he remembered what the van looked like. Jonas said it had no license plates. It had tinted windows and a dent near the back door. He said it smelled like bleach. Briggs recorded the statement. Back in the station, Maya looked through the guest list again and found no match for the man with glasses or the man with the scar. She opened the old photo of Liam and Cassidy from their years under false names. Liam wore glasses in every picture. Maya opened a new tab and searched public health licensing records. She typed Liam's old address and filtered by profession. One name came up that matched the initials JB. The name belonged to a psychiatrist named Julian Barlow. Barlow had been removed from the medical register 12 years ago for ethical violations. A hearing summary stated he had been involved in unauthorized patient transfers and unlicensed treatment programs. His name had come up in relation to a now-defunct private psychiatric facility that had shut down after multiple lawsuits. The facility was located 2 hours outside Waverly Hills. It had been privately owned. Records were sealed, but Maya found an archived newspaper article mentioning a lawsuit involving a woman admitted without consent in 2008. The name was redacted, but the dates matched Elena's disappearance. Maya printed everything and drove to the site of the facility. The building was abandoned, surrounded by a fence with rusted signage. Inside, peeling wallpaper and broken furniture told the story of decay. She walked room by room, filming everything. In a closet near the nurse's station, she found a filing drawer. Most folders had been shredded, but one remained intact. The name on the tab was Elena Carter. The file contained intake forms, observation notes, and a discharge request that was never signed. It stated the patient had arrived agitated and confused with symptoms of trauma. The notes described Elena screaming at night, repeating the name Liam, and begging to be allowed to call her sister. The final note was dated 2 days after the wedding. It stated the patient had escaped during the night. Maya confronts Cassidy, now remarried and isolated. Maya stood in the parking lot of the abandoned psychiatric facility as the wind pushed dead leaves around her feet. The folder in her hands shook with every breath she took. The truth had weight, and it pressed down on her shoulders like a punishment. Her sister had not vanished into the night by choice. She had been taken drugged and locked away. The intake forms were clear. Elena had screamed for help. She had asked to call her sister. No one listened. No one came. Maya drove back to Waverly Hills in silence. Her thoughts boiled. Names swirled in her head. Liam, Julian Barlow, and now Cassidy. The file proved that Elena had escaped the facility, but someone had brought her back. Or someone had stopped her from getting far. Maya could not shake the image of Elena in the woods, barefoot and bleeding. She remembered Jonas's words. 2 men, a van, a warning, and a finger to his lips. Cassidy had confessed part of the truth, but Maya knew she had held something back. Maya returned to Cassidy's house unannounced. She knocked until the door opened. Cassidy stood in a robe, her hair disheveled, eyes puffy. She looked as if she had not slept since their last meeting. Maya stepped inside without asking. She sat on the couch and placed the patient file on the table. Cassidy stared at it like it was poison. Maya told her everything. The letters, the shelter witness, the abandoned facility. She spoke slowly, letting each word land. Cassidy sat down and covered her mouth. Tears welled up and spilled onto her cheeks. She reached for the file but pulled her hand back. Maya asked her to tell the rest. Cassidy hesitated, then she nodded. She said there was more, much more. Cassidy admitted that after the wedding night, she stayed with Liam for a week. He told her Elena had suffered a breakdown. He said she had been taken to a place that would help her. He told Cassidy to keep it quiet for the sake of the family. Cassidy said she believed him. She said he seemed calm and rational. He said Elena had struggled with delusions and had tried to run from the chapel. He said she had injured herself and needed psychiatric help. Cassidy said that 2 days later she saw him burn something in the fireplace. She peeked inside and saw scraps of paper. One of them had Elena's handwriting. She saw part of a sentence. It said, "Please do not let him win." Cassidy told Maya that she confronted Liam. He told her it was none of her concern. He said Elena was being cared for. He said the wedding was a mistake. Cassidy moved out 2 months later, but she never told anyone what she saw. She said she was afraid. Liam had friends in places she did not understand. He knew people at the hospital. He had money. Years passed, and Cassidy tried to move on. She remarried. She had a daughter. But the guilt never left. Every time she saw a white dress, she remembered the look on Elena's face. Maya listened without interrupting. When Cassidy finished, she opened the file again and showed her the intake notes. Cassidy covered her face and sobbed. She said she had not known. She said she thought Elena had been moved to a safe place. Maya asked about the necklace. Cassidy said she had found it in a small black box hidden in a drawer Liam kept locked. She recognized it immediately. When she asked him about it, he did not lie. He said it belonged to Elena. He said he kept it as a reminder of how fragile people could be. Cassidy said she left the next day and never spoke to him again. She gave the necklace to a pawn shop in another town, hoping it would disappear. Maya stood up and asked one final question. She asked if Cassidy believed Elena could still be alive. Cassidy did not answer. She only looked at the floor and whispered that she hoped so. Back at the station, Detective Briggs entered the new testimony into the case file. They now had enough to issue a formal warrant for Liam Rhodes, also known as Daniel Rhodes. Briggs contacted the district attorney and submitted the documents. Meanwhile, Maya searched public auction records and tracked down the pawn shop Cassidy mentioned. The owner had no memory of the necklace, but Maya provided a photo and description. 2 days later, the owner called her back. A woman had purchased the necklace 3 years ago. Maya asked for the buyer's information. The woman had paid in cash, but the shop kept surveillance footage. Maya and Briggs reviewed the tape. The woman wore a wide hat and dark sunglasses, but her posture and movements were familiar. Briggs used facial recognition software to scan the footage. The results came back inconclusive, but the software gave a high similarity score. The system compared it to Elena's old driver's license photo. Maya stared at the screen. Her heart pounded. The woman had Elena's build, Elena's hands, Elena's careful way of folding the receipt. Briggs sent the image to the forensic analyst. The analyst confirmed that, based on body metrics, there was a strong possibility the woman was Elena Carter. They now had evidence that someone resembling Elena had resurfaced 3 years ago in a nearby state. Maya could hardly breathe. She had spent 15 years imagining her sister's face. Now she'd seen a glimpse of her again. Maya began reviewing missing persons reports and hospital records in the area. She found nothing. No one matching Elena's description had been reported. Then she remembered something. The photo of Elena in the car from the drawer in the church. The timestamp, the torn dress, the reflection in the window. Maya enhanced the image and noticed something she had missed before. In the background of the photo behind the glass was the outline of the bell tower. Elena had made it back to the chapel. She had escaped the facility. She had returned. Maya now believed the dress had not been placed there by someone else. Elena had returned to leave a message. Maya walked slowly past the front steps of Belmont Chapel with the surveillance photo clutched in her hand. The woman in the image was not a ghost or a memory. She was real flesh and blood alive somewhere in the same state. And she had chosen to return to climb the bell tower to leave the dress, to leave the message. Maya looked up toward the tower, its windows dark, the rope to the bell swaying gently in the morning wind. She could almost imagine Elena standing there again, watching silently. Back at the station, Detective Briggs received a report from the forensics analyst confirming that the body measurements in the video footage had a 91% match with Elena Carter. That was enough to treat her as a living person. It changed the legal nature of the case. No longer was it a cold file on a missing bride. It was now an active investigation into an attempted disappearance, a conspiracy, and possibly a town-wide cover-up. Maya returned to the chapel grounds with a new purpose. This time she walked around the perimeter examining not just the bell tower or the office, but the cemetery and maintenance buildings nearby. A locked shed behind the chapel had been ignored for years. With the town's permission and a crowbar in hand, she pried it open. The air inside smelled of mildew and decayed wood. Old chairs and rusted tools filled the room, but something caught her eye under a plastic tarp in the corner. She pulled it away and revealed several cardboard boxes, each marked with the church's emblem and dated 15 years ago. Inside the boxes were guest logs, donation records, and correspondence addressed to the former priest, Father Callum Gray. Maya recognized the name from the wedding ceremony. He had officiated the service. She remembered his calming voice, his gentle smile. He had left town shortly after Elena's disappearance and had not returned. Maya brought the boxes to the station. Briggs helped her sift through the papers. Among them was a sealed envelope labeled Private and Confidential. It was addressed to the church council but had never been opened. Maya slid it out and unfolded the letter. It was written by Father Gray 1 week after the wedding. In the letter, he expressed fear and regret. He mentioned seeing something he could not explain. He had witnessed a conversation between Liam and 2 unknown men outside the church during the rehearsal. They spoke in hushed tones. One of the men handed Liam a folder. Father Gray had approached, but the men walked away quickly. The priest also wrote that Elena appeared distressed the morning of the ceremony. She asked to delay the service. She said she felt watched. Father Gray had told her to pray and calm her nerves. He now admitted he regretted not listening. He left the town to escape the shame. Maya folded the letter and stared at the wall. Everyone had failed her sister. The priest, the guests, the authorities. Maya visited the records office to trace Father Gray. He had changed his name and moved to a monastery 2 states away. She called and requested a visit. The abbot agreed. 3 days later, Maya sat in a small stone chamber facing the man who had blessed her sister's wedding. He was older, thinner, and quieter. His hands trembled as he held the letter. He read it again and nodded. He said he remembered everything. He said the folder Liam received contained documents. He caught a glimpse of a medical symbol and the name of a facility he did not recognize. He also remembered that the day after the wedding, the chapel secretary had been instructed to remove the footage from the surveillance system. The secretary, Margaret Olson, had served the chapel for 40 years. Maya visited her next. She lived alone in a cottage on the outskirts of town. Margaret opened the door and stared at Maya as if seeing a ghost. Maya asked her directly, "Did you delete the video files?" Margaret nodded slowly. She said she had done it under Father Gray's instruction. He said it was a private matter and that the footage showed nothing useful. She said she never questioned him. Maya showed her the still frame, the one of Elena staring into the hallway in fear. Margaret began to cry. She said she had only seen a flash of it before deleting the rest. She thought Elena looked frightened, but she told herself it was the lighting or a shadow. Maya asked if anyone else knew. Margaret said one man had asked about the footage after the disappearance, a council member named Thomas Keene. He served on the church board and had close ties to the mayor. Maya visited Thomas at the town hall. He was now retired but kept an office for charity events. When confronted, he denied involvement. But Maya noticed his eyes shift when she mentioned the psychiatric facility. She pressed further, asking if he had ever met Julian Barlow. Thomas said the name sounded familiar. He said the town once considered donating to a new counseling center Barlow proposed, but the plan never moved forward. Maya asked to see any correspondence. Thomas unlocked a cabinet and handed her an old folder. Inside was a brochure for Serenity Oaks Recovery Center. The listed director was Dr. Julian Barlow. The town seal appeared in the corner. Maya flipped the page. A handwritten note had been added. Client secured. Transfer approved. No record. The date on the note matched Elena's wedding day. Maya stood in the middle of the archive room at Waverly Hills Town Hall with the brochure still in her hand and her heart beating fast. The words "client secured, transfer approved, no record" echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. This was no longer just a cover-up. This was a conspiracy. The town had not only looked away, it had helped erase her sister. She walked out of the building into the pale afternoon light and called Detective Briggs. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Briggs listened quietly, then told her to return to the station. Something new had come up. When Maya arrived, Briggs met her in the hallway and pulled her aside. A man had walked into the station that morning, asking to speak about the Elena Carter case. He had been living off the grid for years and claimed he had seen Elena after her escape from the facility. Maya's eyes widened. Briggs led her into the interview room where a man sat wearing a faded jacket and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He introduced himself as Walter Hines. Walter said he used to work maintenance at a rest stop along Highway 6. One night, 15 years ago, he had taken the late shift. Around 3 a.m, he had gone to clean the back hallway when he saw a woman slip in through the employee door. She looked exhausted and terrified. She wore a hospital gown under a coat. Her feet were muddy and blistered. Walter had tried to talk to her, but she backed away. She said her name was Elena and asked if he had a phone. He had led her to the staff lounge and given her water. She had written a number on a napkin and asked him to dial it. Before he could finish the call, 2 men burst through the door. They grabbed her while she screamed and kicked. Walter tried to stop them but was shoved aside. He hit his head against the vending machine and blacked out. When he woke up, the lounge was empty. The napkin with the number was gone. No one believed his story. He had bruises on his arms and cuts on his scalp. The police wrote it off as a fall. Walter said he quit his job the next day and moved away. He said he had never stopped thinking about that night. When he saw Elena's photo in the recent news reports, he knew it was her. Maya stared at him in disbelief. She asked if he remembered the number. Walter said he did not, but he remembered the name she said before they dragged her away. She had whispered the word Maya. Maya covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. This was real. Elena had escaped. She had tried to reach out. She had called her name. Briggs asked Walter to describe the men. Walter said one had glasses and wore a gray jacket. The other had a scar along his jawline. Maya felt her chest tighten. These descriptions matched the ones given by Jonas. Walter agreed to sign an official statement. Briggs entered it into the file. With 2 independent witnesses describing the same 2 men forcibly taking Elena on separate occasions, the case grew stronger. Maya sat in the evidence room that evening reviewing the old photo from the chapel again. Something about it continued to bother her. She zoomed in on Elena's hand. Her fingers were clenched. In her right hand was something small and white. Maya enhanced the image further. It looked like a piece of cloth. She remembered the dress, the one found hanging in the bell tower. She returned to the forensics lab and requested another look at it. She examined the sleeves and hemline carefully. In the inner lining of the waist, she noticed a seam that looked newer than the rest. A faint stitching line stood out. With gloved hands, the technician opened it and revealed a narrow cloth strip folded tightly. Inside was a fragment of paper wrapped in plastic. The ink had faded, but some words were still visible. It read, "If they find this, I am not safe. He knows everything." Maya stared at the message. Elena had hidden it inside the dress. She had returned to the chapel to leave it behind. It was not just a call for help. It was a warning. Back at the station, Briggs compiled all the evidence into a single report. Maya studied the timeline again. The wedding, the escape, the facility, the 2 men, the second abduction, and now the return. Every step was documented. Every clue pointed to the same conclusion. Elena had escaped the facility. She had tried to contact Maya. She had been taken again, but somehow she had survived. Years later, she had returned to the chapel to leave the dress and the note. That meant she was alive as recently as this year. Maya printed the photograph from the pawn shop footage and compared it to the old driver's license. The resemblance was undeniable. The same tilt of the chin, the same narrow shoulders, the same cautious posture. She laid it beside the original wedding photo. Her sister had aged, but she had not vanished. She had endured. Maya opened the patient file from the abandoned facility again. The final entry mentioned a nurse named Celia Moore. Maya searched the name and found that she now worked at a hospice clinic 2 towns over. She visited the clinic the next morning. Celia was in her early 60s now and moved slowly. When Maya introduced herself, Celia froze. She asked if it was about Elena. Maya nodded. Celia led her to a quiet office and closed the door. She said Elena had been terrified during her time at the facility. She had begged to leave. Celia had tried to help her. One night, she left the door unlocked on purpose. Elena slipped out and vanished. Celia was questioned but never charged. The facility shut down a year later. Celia said she never heard from Elena again. Maya showed her the pawnshop photo. Celia stared at it for a long time. Then she said yes. That is her. Maya drove away from the hospice clinic with her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The confirmation from Celia Moore settled deep into her chest like a stone. It was no longer a matter of belief. Elena had escaped. Elena had survived. And Elena had returned. But now Maya needed to know what happened during the time no one saw her. What had they done to her? What had she endured behind the locked doors of that facility? Maya returned to the police station and laid out everything they had. The patient file, the surveillance footage, the statements from Jonas and Walter, the notes in the dress, the photograph from the chapel drawer. each piece of evidence connected like a jagged chain, forming a complete outline of trauma and disappearance. Detective Briggs contacted the State Department of Mental Health to request all known records related to Serenity Oaks Recovery Center. Most were sealed due to the lawsuits, but with the growing case and new witness statements, the legal team pushed forward. Within 2 days, a cache of digital documents arrived. Some were redacted, but enough information remained to piece together what had happened. Serenity Oaks had operated under limited oversight between 2005 and 2010. It had marketed itself as a high-security care center for emotionally distressed patients, but several complaints accused it of accepting individuals without consent or through falsified referrals. Most concerning were documents detailing involuntary patient transfers authorized by unlicensed guardians or forged family signatures. One of those patients was listed as E. Carter. Maya reviewed the intake form again. Elena was admitted 2 days before the wedding under an emergency psychiatric hold. The form listed Liam Rhodes as the legal spouse and guardian. The signature space bore a scribbled name matching his handwriting. Maya stared at the date in disbelief. The wedding had not even occurred yet. He had filed the form in advance. That document alone was enough to press charges for fraud and abuse. But Maya wanted more than evidence. She wanted to understand the scope of what Elena had experienced. She needed to know who had helped Liam and why no one stopped it. Within the facility's archived files, Maya found staff rosters, employee logs, and patient monitoring reports. One name appeared repeatedly in the reports involving Elena, Dr. Julian Barlow. He had conducted her intake exam and ordered her to be held under continuous observation. His notes described her as paranoid, disoriented, and prone to hallucination. But other staff notes contradicted this. One nurse wrote that Elena spoke clearly and consistently, insisted she had been institutionalized against her will. Maya flagged the inconsistencies and handed the files to Briggs. They agreed to track down former staff. They started with a janitor named Kenneth Doyle, who had worked the night shift. He now lived 2 towns over and agreed to speak in exchange for immunity. Kenneth said he remembered Elena well. He said she was quiet but watched everything. She kept to herself and always asked about the outside world. He recalled one night when she slipped him a folded note asking him to mail it. He had been afraid, but kept the note. After the facility closed, he moved and placed the note in a sealed envelope in a lockbox at home. He gave the note to Maya. She unfolded it slowly. The paper was thin and stained, but legible. It said, "My name is Elena Carter. I have been brought here against my will. Please tell my sister Maya." I was not sick. I was not broken. I was trapped. Maya sat in silence after reading the message. Her throat tightened and her eyes blurred. She had imagined hearing her sister's voice again. Now she could read it. Elena had not only escaped, she had fought from the beginning. The records also revealed something more alarming. A document labeled Incident Report detailed an altercation involving Elena and another patient who had tried to protect her. The patient had later been transferred without explanation. The report mentioned restraints and sedation. Elena had been moved to isolation afterward. Maya asked Briggs to search for the second patient. His name was Harold Quill. A quick check showed he had died in 2011 under suspicious circumstances during a facility transfer. The report had been ruled accidental. Everything in the system pointed to a pattern. Silence, obstruction, disappearance. Then Maya found something else. A financial ledger buried in the archives detailed payments made to Serenity Oaks by a donor listed as Rhodes Holdings, LLC. The dates aligned with the months leading up to the wedding. The amounts were substantial. Liam had been funding the facility. Briggs contacted the bank that had managed the transfers. The routing information linked directly to a private account Liam had kept hidden. That discovery opened the path to a financial investigation. Maya took a break from the station and walked to the edge of town where the chapel bells could still be heard from a distance. She closed her eyes and imagined Elena standing inside the bell tower. Elena had returned not just to be seen, but to be heard. She had risked everything to deliver a message that had finally reached her. Back in the evidence room, Maya unfolded the wedding photo again. This time, she placed it beside the pawnshop footage. She compared the eyes, the shoulders, the hands. She whispered her sister's name softly. Detective Briggs entered the room with a printed list in her hand. It was a visitor log from Serenity Oaks. Most names were doctors, nurses, or delivery staff. But one name appeared 3 times across the months Elena had been held. The name was Cassidy Evans. Maya blinked. Cassidy had told her she never visited Elena after the wedding. She had claimed she did not know where she had gone. Briggs said the logs did not lie. Cassidy had signed in 3 times. Maya sat frozen in the evidence room as the visitor log lay on the table in front of her. The 3 entries showing Cassidy's name were clear and unmistakable. The dates placed her at Serenity Oaks during the early months of Elena's confinement. Cassidy had said she knew nothing. Cassidy had claimed Liam never told her where Elena went. Now the truth glared up from the paper. Cassidy had not only known, she had gone to see her. Maya felt betrayal simmer behind her ribs like boiling water. She stood up slowly and handed the log to Detective Briggs, who nodded and said it was time for another visit. They drove out to Cassidy's house without a word spoken between them. Maya stared out the window the entire ride, the knot in her stomach tightening with every mile. Cassidy answered the door just as she had before, her eyes hollow, her shoulders sunken. But this time, she did not pretend to be surprised. Inside the living room, Maya placed the visitor log on the table. Cassidy looked at it without touching it. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the edge of the page. Maya asked her to explain. Cassidy sat back in her chair and nodded. She said she had lied. She said Liam had told her where Elena was being kept shortly after the wedding. He told her Elena had suffered a complete breakdown and needed to be held in a secure environment. Cassidy said she believed him at first. But when she saw Elena during the first visit, something broke. Elena did not look delusional. She looked terrified. She held Cassidy's hand and whispered that she had been taken. She said Liam had done this. She said she needed help. Cassidy had left shaken and unsure of what to believe. On the second visit, Elena had passed her a folded piece of paper and begged her to give it to Maya. Cassidy said she never did. She burned it. She said she was scared. She thought it would make things worse. By the third visit, Elena had changed. Her eyes were dull. Her voice was flat. She no longer spoke of escape. Cassidy left that day and never returned. She said she buried it all because it was easier to pretend she did not know. Maya could hardly speak. Cassidy reached across the table and tried to apologize, but Maya pulled her hand back. She said nothing as she walked out the door and into the night air. The next morning, Maya returned to the site of Serenity Oaks. The building still stood quiet and rotting. Its windows cracked, its gates rusted. She walked around the perimeter until she reached the rear of the property. There, she found an old fire escape partially covered by vines. Using an old map of the facility, Maya matched the rear stairwell to a hallway listed as Observation Ward C. According to records, this was the section where Elena had been moved following the incident report. Maya photographed the stairwell and entered the main building again with permission. Inside the hallway, dust covered the floor, but faint smudges showed someone had passed through more recently than expected. In one corner, near a collapsed cabinet, Maya found a small metal ring attached to the wall. A short, frayed rope dangled from it. A piece of broken glass lay nearby with dried brown stains. Maya took a sample and gave it to the forensics lab. While waiting for the results, she reviewed more documents, including staff shift schedules from the night Elena escaped. One nurse named Irene Mays had worked the shift alone. Maya tracked her down through a medical licensing board and found she now worked in a small elder care home. Irene met Maya at a public library after her shift. She remembered Elena clearly. She said Elena had been placed under sedation most nights, but on that particular night the order had not come through. Elena had stayed awake and asked Irene questions about the doors, the halls, and the cameras. Irene thought she was simply confused. But later she heard a crash and found the observation ward window broken. Elena was gone. Blood on the windowsill indicated she had cut herself climbing out. Irene said she had been warned not to speak about it. The report she filed had been edited before being submitted. The original had gone missing. When the lab returned the results from the rope sample, the blood matched Elena's DNA. It confirmed she had used the back stairwell to escape. Maya mapped the escape route, from Observation Ward C to the fire escape. From there, she likely entered the woods behind the facility and followed a rural road to the nearest public area. That would have been the rest stop where Walter Hines encountered her. Maya revisited the photo taken in the chapel drawer. She enhanced the reflection again and realized something new. In the background beyond the bell tower window stood a tree with a unique split trunk. Maya searched photos of the chapel grounds from years past and found the same tree marked in a property survey. It stood directly behind the chapel, just 20 feet from the rear entrance. That meant, after her second escape, Elena had made it back to the chapel. She had reached the place where it all began. She had entered alone, climbed the tower, left her dress, and hidden the message. Briggs reviewed security reports from buildings nearby and discovered a motion alert had been triggered at a nearby electrical station on the same night the dress was found. A blurry image showed a figure walking barefoot through the woods. Maya stared at the image and felt a wave of emotion crash over her. Her sister had survived 2 escapes. She had walked through darkness and pain and fear just to be seen, just to leave a sign. Maya stood alone in the bell tower at dusk with the empty wooden beam above her where the wedding dress had once hung, swaying in silence. The tower echoed with the breath of old air and the rustle of history. Dust floated around her like tiny ghosts of everything that had happened. She ran her fingers across the stone and thought of Elena barefoot, cut bleeding, walking through the woods and climbing this tower alone to leave behind the truth. The dress was not just a symbol of what was stolen from her. It was a declaration. I survived. I am not gone. I was never lost. Maya had spent weeks assembling the evidence. Every document, every photo, every statement. She had cataloged Elena's intake and escape. She had tracked the movement of funds from Liam's secret accounts. She had filed everything with the district attorney who now had enough to open a criminal case. A grand jury convened within days. The charges were severe: fraud, unlawful imprisonment, abuse of guardianship, evidence tampering, psychological coercion. When the arrest warrant was approved, Maya stood beside Detective Briggs as the federal agents arrived at the marina where Liam, now known as Daniel Rhodes, was boarding a yacht. He turned toward them, smiling with a glass in his hand, and froze when he saw Maya. His eyes did not register fear. They registered disbelief. She had not broken down. She had not moved on. She had hunted him, and now she stood watching as the agents placed his hands behind his back and led him away. The news broke nationwide. The headlines told of a bride who vanished and returned, of a man who built a life on lies, of a sister who never stopped searching. But the real story was quieter than the headlines. It lived in the spaces between dates and shadows. It was about the wounds that do not bleed and the silences that never stop speaking. Maya turned down every interview request. She let the facts speak. She stayed focused on one goal: finding Elena. The footage from the electrical station remained the last confirmed sighting. No bank accounts matched her name. No new photos surfaced. She had disappeared again, but this time Maya believed it was by choice. Elena had spent years in hiding and then chose the moment to reappear. She had returned to leave the dress and the message, then vanished again. But she had done so on her own terms. That made all the difference. Months passed and the trial began. Maya sat in the front row every day as Liam stood before the court. He did not testify. He said nothing as the evidence was presented. Maya read Elena's hidden notes aloud on the final day. She held up the photograph from the chapel. She described every step her sister had taken to free herself. The courtroom fell silent when Maya read the final message. I was not sick, I was not broken, I was trapped. The jury returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Liam was sentenced to 40 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 20. As the judge read the sentence, Maya felt a heaviness leave her chest. Not joy, not triumph. Just the lifting of something old and painful and deeply buried. She left the courthouse alone. The sky above was clear and blue and endless. She drove without destination until she reached the edge of a small town with a diner and a gas station and a library no bigger than a house. She stopped for coffee and sat by the window. An older woman behind the counter came by to refill her cup. She had soft eyes and a quiet smile. She asked if Maya was passing through or staying a while. Maya said she was just passing through. The woman nodded and said the town was quiet but kind. She walked away without another word. Maya watched her go, then noticed a framed photo hanging behind the counter. A group of volunteers standing outside a shelter with paint on their hands and dust on their shirts. One of them stood to the side wearing a hat and sunglasses. Maya leaned closer. The face was mostly hidden, but the tilt of the chin and the shape of the hands looked familiar. She did not ask. She did not stare. She paid for her coffee and left a generous tip. She stepped into the sun and walked slowly to her car. She felt something shift in the air behind her. Not a sound, not a word, just a presence, a stillness. She drove away with tears in her eyes and a small smile on her lips. 2 months later, Maya returned to Waverly Hills and hosted a community meeting inside the restored chapel. The town had changed. The lies had been exposed. The silence had been broken. The doors of the chapel were no longer locked. Maya unveiled a memorial at the base of the bell tower. Not a statue, not a plaque, just a glass case holding the preserved wedding dress and a framed copy of Elena's message. Around it were photographs of other women who had survived systems of silence, survivors of abuse, victims of unjust institutions, people who had endured and escaped. The foundation Maya created in Elena's name offered legal aid, mental health support, and emergency housing for women at risk. It operated quietly but with purpose. Maya worked there full-time. She gave lectures. She told her sister's story. She turned grief into momentum. Every year, on the anniversary, Maya returned to the bell tower and stood beneath the beam. She never brought flowers. She never said much. She just stood in silence and listened to the wind pass through the stones. One year, a letter arrived in the chapel mailbox. It had no return address. Inside was a pressed flower and a single line written in delicate handwriting. You were right to never stop looking. Maya placed the letter in the glass case beside the dress. She did not need a signature. She already knew Elena had not been saved. Elena had saved herself. Maya had only brought the truth into the light. And in the end, that was enough. If this story moved you, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part stayed with you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? We want to hear your voice.